Hey guys, one of the most important questions that I get from students within the UK and around the world is actually based on the ORE, the exam that overseas dentists, if they are not ORE exempt, so if they're not from an EU country, they'll have to be taking this. Now the ORE exemption list, I've covered this in a video where I've outlined the universities that are exempt from this exam, but there's quite a lot of universities unfortunately that therefore have to take the exam, so go check that video out to learn more. In the meantime, we are going to discuss actually how hard the exam is, because a lot of people just sit there and think, well, if I've got to take it anyway, then it can't be that bad, surely. Well, let me give you some harsh realities about the exam in itself. And for my source material today, I'm going to be using this, the dentistry.co.uk magazine, which I've subscribed to, and I would urge everybody out there to do the same thing. If you go onto dentistry.co.uk, you can register and actually apply for this magazine to be sent to your house once a month, and it's completely free. This is the July 2024 edition. You can also get the articles online, obviously, but I kind of am very old school, so I like to kind of have this in hand and read through it. Now, within this magazine on page 42 of this edition, there is an article here by Dr. Gauri Pradhan, right? And she's from India. So this kind of is going to be my source material, so I'm not just saying this like I have a mate that did ORE, or I've heard this and this about ORE. This is here, it's online. I'll leave the link to this article in the description box below for you to follow along with anyway. But this is what we're going to use today to highlight for those people out there that think the ORE is easy and doable, to give you a bit more light on actually how hard it really is. So let's get into it. So in the first part of Dr. Gauri's article, she kind of gives a bit more of a background as to where she's from. So she came to the UK back in 2007. So this is almost 20 years ago. She qualified from India with a BDS and then went on to do a master's in oral and maxillofacial surgery, which, as we all know, is intense, very difficult, and is not for the faint of heart. It's usually for those people that really know dentistry inside out. Top level performing students would usually take this postgraduate route into dentistry. Now, as you can read further on yourself when you get the time, within this opening paragraph, she explains how tough that was, the amount of work and graft she put into it, and the amount of experience she was undertaking during that time. So she really did know her clinical stuff. She knew her practical side of things with patients. She was very much a top-notch student. She actually goes later on to explain that she was a dentist from a family of dentists, high-performing parents within dentistry, and she herself was one of the top-performing students in her class. So she was a heavy hitter in her class. So she knew everything on a theoretical level, and then obviously through to a practical level. She had experience in the UK as well, but this did not help her when it got down to the ORE. Let's get into that now. So if you go into her third part of the article, it's titled Difficulties with the Overseas Registration Exam. She kind of outlines as to how much effort she had to put into her ORE preparation. And she says here, quote, using every free minute I had studying late into the night and working the next morning. Because obviously she had to balance her work with obviously studying for the ORE. It's not very easy at all. Part one, which a lot of people do echo, is something that's quite doable. It's not easy. It encapsulates the entire 5-year UK BDS degree into exam format. So they will test you on anything from year 1 to year 5 at UK degree level, and you'll have to know that for your exam. So again, because this is theory based, you can pass it. I'm not saying it's impossible. The ORE in general, it is passable, but it's about the numbers and the percentages. Is it doable? Is it easy? No, it's not, right? You're going to have to know a lot of information. You're going to have to be able to perform at the exam in itself. And then obviously once you pass part one, that's kind of the easiest step of two very difficult steps in the first place. Part two is kind of where things get a bit difficult for Dr. Gauri, and she explains this in that same section. When she discusses part two, she was also doing a senior house officer role as well at the same time, right? So she's gaining the experience, she's getting her practical skills up to speed, she's got bags of experience behind her when it comes to her handwork, and part two is all about your handwork. It's a practical based exam. I think there's 4 or 5 elements to it, Part of that is actually to work on a mannequin and carry out, I think, 2 minor procedures and 1 major procedure. So it's very handwork driven. Then there's obviously clinical scenarios and role plays that you have to pass as well. But within this time, she says, and I quote, "I prepared for part 2, sat it and failed it. So I prepared again, sat it and failed it again the second time. I then prepared again, sat it and failed it again." So this is 3 times that she's failed it. "By the 3rd failed attempt, I was almost full-term pregnant when I took the exam and recall one of the examiners saying, 'Please don't give birth here,' in jest to lighten things up," right? So she'd been there, done that. She's trying to carry on with her life. She's obviously starting a family as well. And all of this is just really delaying what she probably had thought would have been where she would be working as a dentist by now. Because each time that she's going to be applying and failing, that's probably another year added on, because these exams don't come very often throughout the year. Coupled with this, she outlines that there is a 5-year maximum period between passing ORE Part 1 and passing ORE Part 2. So for example, if you ended up in that same hell of having to repeat the exam and then repeat it again for any reason, you are within a 5-year limit. If you hit that 5-year limit and you haven't passed Part 2, then you'll actually have to sit Part 1 all over again. So you're starting from scratch once more. This is not helpful for anybody who's looking to sit the ORE, because your timescales are all over the place. This is an excellent read for anybody out there, and I'd highly recommend for everybody out there to kind of give this the time that it deserves. It's not a long article, and you know, in short, I don't want to scare you guys, because she does have some positives to say as well. That the ORE is inevitably very much a doable thing, but because of ORE Part 2, people don't realise how difficult it truly is. The UK standards need you to carry out these 3 procedures, 2 minor, 1 major. Any mistakes means you fail that, and therefore fail the whole of Part 2. Within that, let's say for example, you were to pass that specific segment of ORE Part 2, then you've got the clinical role plays to do. You need to understand radiographs and patient histories, couple that all with any of the allergies that they might have. So if you were to diagnose and then you were to prescribe, you need to be doing everything according to what your patient is during the role plays. It's complicated. It's definitely not easy, and you can make a single small hiccup and that could be the end of Part 2 for you, putting you back into that whole process again. Dr. Gori actually mentions that this is attributed 5 to 7 extra years in her career just doing the ORE, and all of the mess around that goes with it. So people that are fortunate enough that are still thinking about doing dentistry and getting onto a course maybe abroad, just consider the amount of time you will probably be wasting if you end up in countries like Georgia, for example, that are outside the EU and have to sit the ORE. That can take an extra 5 or 7 years onto your career. Another thing to consider is the fact that you'll be coming out of university as a fresh graduate. Now, you have to understand that the rest of the world that's trying to apply for the ORE, in most cases, they're going to be very experienced clinicians, a bit like Dr. Gori's case. They've done maxillofacial surgery, they have worked with patients for hours and hours on end, and they're struggling with the ORE. They're struggling with Part 2. You'll be coming out as a fresh graduate, coming back to the UK trying to sit one of the hardest exams on the planet, and hoping that your practical skills, which you probably won't have much of at that time, is going to get you through Part 2. It's a bit of an overestimation of what you'll cover at university, because even in UK universities, the practical handwork level is probably not as good as those clinicians from overseas. I know that I have loads of people that watch these videos that are coming from overseas, and this is their only route in. And for you guys, I wish you all the best. Genuinely do feel as though if you put your head down, and with the amount of experience that you guys have in your home countries, you could probably get through this over time, but it will take you some time. And with that time comes cost, and also it comes with a lack of income, because in those 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever it is that it takes you to pass the ORE, you're not earning anything as a dentist. So for those that are trying to get into university in this year or the following year, I always say, you get what you pay for, and if you try to go down the route of a cheaper country with tuition fees, but you have to do the ORE later, you'll suffer for it. Because you'll be coming out of university and being in a position where you will not be earning like the people that have gone to EU countries, and they'll make up for the extra tuition fee within the first year anyway. So really guys, don't try to jump the gun here. Don't try to skip years. Dentistry is meant to be hard, but the route into dentistry should not be. And that's where you have total control. So try everything you can to make the right decision. don't just be focused on the tuition fees in itself, be focused on the end goal here, and you yourself can be hopefully skipping this notoriously hard exam and being a successful dentist in the UK. I've covered a couple of frequently asked questions in my last video as well about the EU recognised countries, in that will the ORE be scrapped, or will the ORE be something that all unis will have to do or all graduates have to do? In both cases, I see no evidence that the ORE will ever be scrapped, and the main reason behind that is the patient safety in the UK. Otherwise, anyone from anywhere could just come over and the UK would just be a sham country for dentistry. The UK really does pride itself on its level of dentistry. They would never do that. Whether everyone will have to do the ORE or not makes no sense either, and I've covered this before, because there are so many overseas EU recognised dentists that are coming over and make up about over a third of the workforce in the UK, that making them do the ORE would just cripple the NHS. And to be fair, there would be no incentive for EU graduates to therefore then come back to the UK. So really and truly, I can't ever see that happening. There's no evidence to suggest it, and it's more a tactic used by agencies to make you feel as though, well, I'll just pay less and go to places like Georgia or Serbia, and we'll all have to do the ORE anyway, or none of us will have to do the ORE. These are just sales tactics. They're after your money. Think twice, think about your own future. I hope that you've taken in a lot of information from this one and enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you all on the next ones. Take care and goodbye.